Welcome back to the 1-0 podcast. I'm Seth Engle.
And I'm Zach Allen.
And we are all settled in our new podcast studio here right before we hit the road to beautiful Champaign, Illinois tomorrow for Penn State, Illinois, Penn State's first road game of the year. How you feeling ahead of our road trip together? You ready to spend 9.5 hours with me?
Yeah, maybe. I pretty much am. I'm mentally preparing for that. But, we got 10 hours ahead of us. Maybe stop and pick up McDonald's on the way. But this is what football season's all about, and it makes covering the team fun.
Yeah, I think we're pretty excited to get going tomorrow. I can't necessarily say the same for James Franklin, though, who seems a little upset that Penn State is opening Big Ten play on the road, again, for the 8th time in a row and 13 of the past 14 years. Zach, is it a big deal to open on the road for 8 years in a row? And why do you think James Franklin cares so much about that?
I think it's less of that it's a big deal, but more it's just like an odd phenomenon because 8 straight years opening conference play, you'd think one year they might get, a lucky break and open one at Beaver Stadium. But I think it more so matters when it is the season opener, like last year at Purdue. Penn State barely came through and won, and then they end up going on and winning the Rose Bowl. And then, obviously, the year before, they played a ranked Wisconsin team on the road. And then the year before that was the Indiana controversial 2-point conversion. So now that I think Penn State has 2 games under their belt, one against a Power 5 team in West Virginia, I don't think it's as big of a deal. It's just more that it's weird it's happened so many years in a row. And like you said, 13 out of the 14 years, too. Yeah,
I mean, that Indiana year was obviously a COVID year. It was only conference play. Everything was kind of messed up. But then those next 2 years with Wisconsin and Purdue, those were 2 good teams right there. I think that's when we really started to hear it more from Franklin in terms of how upset he was about those games being scheduled. Because it's one thing to start on the road like they are this year in Week 3 against Illinois. It's another to start your season, like you mentioned before, especially against, Wisconsin was ranked at the time. Purdue was highly competitive, went on to play in the Big Ten championship last year. I don't know. I think it is, like you said, more odd than anything else that it is just 8 years without, switching it up at all from the Big Ten Conference. 13 out of 14 years that's just a lot, But anyway, it's not just any road game. It's Drew Aller's first road game. So now we're kind of like every single time he takes the field, we're looking at it as, okay, this is his first year doing this, first time doing this. It's all a bunch of firsts. Entering his first road game and his first Big Ten game, what does Drew Aller still have to prove?
I think the obvious answer is prove he can handle, the noise from a road crowd. Obviously, Illinois is not known to be one of the most hostile environments in the world compared to Ohio State, which he's going to play on the road this year. But still, the first road start as a college quarterback is not a small deal anywhere, even if it was like one of the smaller stadiums or if he even played Delaware on the road. So I think there's that. And then later on in the season, just proving he can do it against, the juggernauts of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think before we get to the Michigans and the Ohio States of the Big Ten schedule, I think Illinois is a good test. It's a different team than they were last year. I don't think there's any question about that. But it's a team that has seen winning last year. It's a team with a good head coach in Brett Bielema. And I think it's a good test for Drew Aller.
And not to mention 2 years ago, Illinois upset Penn State at Beaver Stadium. So
right, and we'll get a little into that in a bit. But I think for Drew personally, I think he's shown that he can be pretty efficient. He hasn't thrown an interception yet. His passing yards are above 500 through 2 games. He's thrown 4 touchdowns. He's rushed for another. He's looked good. I think that consistency is still something to look for him. Because it's one thing to go through 2 games. I know he played well against West Virginia, a real Power 5 team. He went in, he played well against Delaware, an FCS team, but can he continue to do that in a Big Ten schedule? We'll see. Another thing that we should look for entering this Illinois game is potential availability updates. We saw at practice on Wednesday, primary nickel corner Daquan Hardy, defensive tackle Keziah Zard, and defensive end Amin Vanover, who had missed those first two games for whatever reason. They were practicing with their respective teams in the correct jerseys. What do you make of that if they're able to play on Saturday?
First of all, I think it's just, especially with Keziah, that defensive tackle spot again. I mean, the only touchdown Delaware had was a long run, and we saw that against Michigan. I know we've brought that up before on here. But I think adding more depth to that position is just a benefit. The bottom line is just a benefit. And then you move on to Daquan Hardy. He's manned that nickel slot for a couple years now, and it's being a slot corner. It's a little different, and having that experience, especially like Hardy has, would greatly benefit Penn State's already stout pass defense that we've seen. And then I think Amin Vanover, he just adds more to the pass rush. Like, you have Deny, you have Chop, you have Adisa Isaac, but then you add, Amin Vanover in there, another guy who can give those guys a break but still get it done. I think if all three of those guys come back against Illinois, it really strengthens the defense even more than we've seen.
We know you love cheering on the Nittany Lions, but being a part of Penn State doesn't just happen on Saturdays. Whether it's joining Nittanyville or another student organization, showing your skills in the IM flag football field, or having University Health Services help you recover from a sore throat from cheering, Student Affairs is what you need to make the most of your Penn State experience. They're here to help you find your community, take care of yourself, stay safe and feel supported, get involved, and prepare for life as an alumni. Learn more about how to be a part of it all at studentaffairs.psu.edu or follow at studentlifepsu. Yeah, I think starting with Daquan Hardy, I mean, he is important for so many reasons in that nickel spot. They've put Johnny Dixon in there a little bit in Hardy's absence. Now Dixon can go back to doing his own, primary corner role if Daquan does come back. Hardy's also, great on special teams, especially if Malik Mega is to miss, another game. If Hardy plays, I think that's huge for that unit as well. Amin Vanover, that defensive end room, as hyped up as it was in the offseason, has struggled to stack up numbers through two games. I believe there are only 2 sacks by a defensive lineman so far this season. One of them was Zane Durant from the interior, and the other was Jameel Lyons, a true freshman who came in the fourth quarter against Delaware. So, I mean, Amin Vanover coming in and giving some added depth to a room that hasn't necessarily lived up to the hype of this is potentially the best defensive end room in the country, I think is really important. Now, it's still a room with a lot of talent. They haven't necessarily played, poorly. They just haven't really racked up the numbers I think people were expecting. And then Keziah, like you said, I mean, that defensive tackle room, against Illinois, which is a team that likes to run the football, and we'll get into that in a little bit, they're going to need help inside. They haven't struggled too much, but we saw Michigan last year. That was a problem. If Penn State wants to knock off Ohio State and Michigan this year, that run defense has to improve, and I think Keziah does help in that regard. Moving forward, Illinois, it's a different team than it was last year. What do you make of this Illinois roster, especially after they just lost to Kansas last week?
Yeah, I think it starts with their new quarterback, Luke Altmaier. He transferred from Ole Miss, and he's kind of similar to what Penn State faced against West Virginia's Garrett Green, which is another reason why that West Virginia game was important. He can get it done through the air. We saw that Ole Miss a little bit last year, and he can get it done with his legs. I think that makes it 2 times as hard to defend as opposed to just a guy who sits back in the pocket, stands there waiting for an open receiver. And then defensively, it's defensive tackle Jerzon Newton. Illinois had one of the best defenses in the country last season, and he was the defensive tackle for it. He led the team in sacks at defensive tackle and tackles for loss. He's been named to pretty much every preseason award watch list, and I think he has the ability to be a run stopper for them against Penn State, who had over 300 rushing yards last week against Delaware.
Yeah, Newton is spectacular. If you don't know Jerzon Newton, you should look his name up before Saturday because he is very, very good. He was a consensus preseason All-American. He is one of the best players in the country. He's a projected first-rounder, and he's coming for Drew Aller. This is when we talk about, okay, what does Drew Aller still have to prove? Can you escape a guy like that who is going to line up from the interior and rack up sacks? He had 2 sacks against Kansas last week from the inside. Yeah. So he can also flip to the outside as well. And when you could do that, you present a lot of problems there. So Jerzon Newton is someone to look for. It's a big test for that offensive line. This is an offensive line that's played pretty well so far. There have been a little hiccups, in the first 2 games, but I think it's a deep offensive line, and it's one that should be able to handle Illinois. But facing, one of the best DTs in the country, it's a little preview for what you might see against Michigan. So that's someone I'm looking for, absolutely. Isaiah Williams, wide receiver, James Franklin said it best the other day. It seems like he's been there forever. But he's still here, and he's playing very well. He's playing very good football, and he is Luke Altmaier's, number 1 target pretty early on. He had 99 yards last week against Kansas. That's what I'm looking for. Another thing I'm looking for is this is just a different Illinois team.
Yeah.
It is so different. Everyone's picking Illinois preseason as Penn State's, potential trap game, and I'm saying, I don't know. And they really haven't shown that. They almost lost to Toledo. They just lost by 10 to Kansas. It's is Illinois really legit? And then what's your prediction for how things go on Saturday?
Well, I was going to bring up their 2 games this season already. They needed a last-second field goal to beat Toledo. And then, Kansas, they've had more success last season, but it's still not a successful football program, and they lost, like you said, by 11 points. And I know, like I said earlier, Illinois upset Penn State last season in the 9 overtime game that everyone talks about. But this will need another period to decide it. I think even on the road, Drew Aller's first road start, opening the Big Ten on the road, it doesn't really matter. I think Penn State is just the better team. Maybe not at defensive tackle because of Newton, but overall, I think Penn State has the advantage pretty much everywhere. And I don't think this one will be really close. The spread's currently set at 14.5 points in Penn State's favor, and I think Penn State's going to cover that. They've covered the last 2 games. The offense looks sharp. The defense, the run defense could be a little better, but the pass defense hasn't let anything really through. Week 1, there are a couple, long passes that were open. But bottom line, this is just not going to be that close of a game. It might be close through a quarter, maybe 2, but I think, Penn State pulls us out 38-10.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up that the 2021 9 overtime game. I think a lot of players this week were asked whether, that still sits with them, the feeling of that game, and they're obviously, no, we're focused on just this game alone. But, I think some of them do still feel that. It's hard not to. So going into this game, I can't talk enough about how different this Illinois team is from last year. That was a good Illinois team. They lost Chase Brown. They lost Witherspoon. They lost Sidney Brown. Just a number of NFL guys on that team. Witherspoon's probably, arguably the best player in program history is now gone. Chase Brown in that 9 overtime game broke the Beaver Stadium rushing record. He's gone. That was their whole offense. So when I look at this Illinois team, I don't see the hype that everyone else had this preseason. Oh, good defensive line. I'm like, they have no offense. So going into this game, I mean, I do not think it'll be close. That 14.5 spread, I don't care if it's on the road in Champaign, Illinois. That is not a hectic environment. The students that go there do not care about Illinois football. Maybe they did last year for a little bit, but if Illinois is losing to Kansas, I'll tell you right now, they do not care about Illinois football right now. I'm going 45-15. I know is in Penn State's favor. I know that's a wider margin than I think most people are anticipating, but I do not think this game will be close at all. I think Penn State is legit. I don't know if they're legit enough to beat Michigan and/or Ohio State. We'll see when the time comes. But I think at this point, Penn State's playing very good football. I think they're locked in, and I think they're going to do damage in Champaign. Well, that's it for us. This has been the 1-0 Pod. You can follow us along at psucollegian.com and on Twitter at psufootblog.
Peace.